Hey guys, it's Sunday reading day, and I'll be reading from the book 25 Ghost Stories, written by various authors. I'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Happy Sunday, everybody. How's everybody doing? I hope... Oh, yeah, I hear that. Wow, resounding. Everybody's been out in the sunshine, at least here in Northern California. Let me get my little buttons pushed here. There we go. Getting the right spots. Too many buttons for me to push. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so, and I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal need, we can get to you. It might take us a couple days because California is like this huge state. Okay, people don't realize it. You know, when they think of California, you think of something like Hawaii, right? You think of the Beach Boys, right? You know, you got beaches and surfing and things like that. California girls. Well, it is like that on the coast, but there's so much more than the coast of California. You know, we got valleys, we've got deserts, we've got mountains, we've got high deserts, you name it, we've got it here. And it's a big state. So that's why, you know, even though we have people living in populated areas, it may take us a while to get to you. And what I mean by a while is maybe 1 or 2 days. And in the case that it's 1 or 2 days, actually, we do have psychics on staff who can call you and see if you have something paranormal going on. And if they think you do, they can contact whatever it is, and they can calm the energy down before we get out there. Okay? That way, it makes it calmer for you until we come out to see you. Okay. If you're watching from Facebook today, and you want to find us, actually, let me go back on that. If you want to find us because you have a paranormal need, Google California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team. Google California Haunts Radio. We will pop up. We're everywhere. We're everywhere on Google. You can also get us on Facebook and YouTube and Twitch and all the social media stuff. So just Google, you know, TikTok, you name it, we're there. That being said, if you're watching from Facebook, and a lot of you are today, please feel free to hit that follow button if you haven't done so already, especially if you like what you see today, what you see in here. Because you know, we're always looking for followers. Also, if you like what you see in here today, be sure to give me a thumbs up. Be sure to give me a happy heart, which I can never freaking do. You know, be sure to give me a smiley. And be sure, if you're in my chat room, be sure to chat. Because what that does, and it works the same way on YouTube and all the other social media sites. What that does is it tells the master computer that we're getting interaction here. And it puts this out higher, what I call the FYP, which sends this out to more people, okay? It'll distribute this out more, and that's what we want to do, is we want to be seen and heard, right? That's the whole key of doing this stuff. So if you feel it in your heart to do that, if you like what you see today, that's great. Again, YouTube is another place for you guys to hang out. We have a big YouTube page. It's almost 800 videos over there. They're all of this show, and we just probably had a glitch. The internet is overloaded right now. I can see the little internet warning thing on there. I live in an area where everybody's on Xfinity, and so I can always see when the internet is overloaded. And it's overloaded right now. So you may see me drop off or freeze up. That's just how it is. I can't do anything about that, you know, except switch internet carriers. I had a couple good days this last week where that didn't happen. So you never know. It's a day-by-day thing. Getting back to YouTube, we do have almost 800 videos over there. It's all this show, and I just don't read on Sundays. This is just something I do to kind of slide everybody into the work week, right? You know, we just sit here and get together for a little bit of a reading. You know, who doesn't like ghost stories, right? So that's what I do. Sometimes I'll read from a paranormal book written by somebody who experienced the stuff, like Lynn Monet, or I will read a fantasy book, you know, by somebody, you know, could be any kind of ghost stories. Like today's topic, we've been reading this book this is the 6th week we're reading this book, and there's 25 stories in here, and who knows if some are true, and who knows if some are fantasy. Don't know. That's for you to judge as I read the stories. Okay, back to YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube page, and I think you will once you take a look, I'm a journalist. for my real job. I'm also a photojournalist, so I don't like to do the same stuff every day. So I like to change it up. So you'll get a lot of different types of shows over there. So you gotta check them all out. And I started to put things under categories because the categories help you find stuff. Because for me, when I go over there, my eyes bulge. It's overwhelming. So I decided to start categorizing. Just like a good example of that is this coming week. I've got, tomorrow we're going to be building with Legos. This is something that we do. I call it the Kickback Relax Monday. And we're going to be building with Legos. And not only that, I have finished the gingerbread house, the Easter gingerbread house. So I'm going to show you guys that. Plus the eggs that we colored. Grogu back there helped color the eggs. So he's excited to show you his Easter eggs, his galactic eggs. He made them look like planets. It's pretty cool. But on Tuesday we're going to be talking with Barb Shoop about Sasquatch and her contacts with Sasquatch. Wednesday we're going to be talking to a gentleman about the mafia in Hollywood. So we're going to have that conversation. So we're really looking forward to the people we have on this week. As far as the show goes. And again, it's just different types of topics that we like to cover. Okay. Again, this is Sunday, and what I'd like you to do is just turn the lights down, like the thing says. Get your popcorn and snacks and all that stuff, and get some wine, maybe. I'm not going to tell you to drink. Okay, I can't do that legally. I'm not going to tell you to drink. Get in trouble. But you can maybe get a glass of wine, get some coffee, get some warm milk. Get some. Get whatever it is you like to drink. Maybe you're in front of your fire. If you're back east, it's still cold. It's warm here. There's no fire here. No more fires in California. No, especially at least in Sacramento. No more fires. Too warm. But and cuddle up and put your feet up. Maybe go put on your fuzzies. Put your fuzzies on your feet. Put the kids to bed because for some of you it's 8 p.m. For some of you it's almost 10 p.m. Right? So put the kids to bed and just lower those lights and listen to some pretty good ghost stories. These stories come from a free site. These are all copyright free, and some of these have authors and some of these don't. Some of these are anonymous. The Gutenberg. You want to check out Gutenberg Project? Check that out. These are people that have gotten together and put books together, and not only books together, but old books, and taken them and I would say deciphered, kind of went through and retyped them all into ebook form, which is kind of cool. And they're copyright free, and that's why we're reading these, right? Because you don't want to get sued. Okay, so we're going to get back into 24 stories here. Let me get my tablet up and running, and away we go. And again, we're going to read probably maybe 3 chapters of this, and then we're out of it. So, like I say, enjoy yourself. Some people even clean house while I'm reading. I know I've got some friends that tell me that they carry me around in their pocket when they're doing laundry. Hey, I'm cool with that. But anyway, Sunday, excuse my squeaky chair. I do need a new chair. That's the next major purchase, is to get myself a nice gaming chair. Company colors, red and black, of course, so I'm working on that. We are going to have some events coming up. We're going to be doing some public ghost hunts. If you guys are interested in that, I'm going to be setting those up as well. So there's a lot coming up, and looking forward to meeting all you guys one-on-one as well. I'm going to be training some people as ghost hunters. I got around 4 openings on my team, and so I'm going to be looking for people to join my team. And and we're also going to be going on ghost hunts. So away we go. Okay. So I have had allergy voice, even though I take allergy pills. So if my voice starts to get kind of rattly, just bear with me. Starting to do that now. So let me get moving here, and we'll open up. I use a thing called Pocketbook off my tablet. The Pocketbook Reader. So, when I counted the pages on this book this afternoon, I figured that we had at least 71% of the book to go, so we should be okay as far as length. And please do chat in the chat room if you feel so inclined to do so. I have to enlarge this, so just bear with me. Make sure I get on the right page. There we go. Because I'm blind, like a lot of people our ages, I am blind, and I fully admit that I'm blind. So, give me a few minutes to get this set up here to the proper size that I need. Oh, the old mansion. Hang on. Where'd it go? Okay, hang on. Looks like there it is. Okay, so when we left off, we had finished off the other story, we're beginning the old mansion. So here we go. And I will be drinking water. If you hear music in the background, it's Sunday, the weekend. My neighbors love to have company, so they've got company over and they're playing their music. And you know what's funny is that when I get my backyard set up finally, which will be in 2 or 3 weeks here, I'll be doing the same thing, only my music is a lot different than their music, so it makes for an interesting neighborhood. And it's a good thing I've got good neighbors on one side, good neighbors on the other side, because it can get, interesting. And then I also have a neighbor towards the back of me who has his yard set up similar to mine, and he plays jungle sounds. So it's kind of funny late at night. Quick drink of Grogu here. And let's read the book. This is called The Mansion, and it's by Anonymous. I wonder who Anonymous is. Anonymous gets around. So here we go. Just flip pages on me. Down on Long Beach, that narrow strip of sand which stretches along the New Jersey coast from Barnegat Inlet to the north of Little Egg Harbor Inlet on the south, the summer sojourner at some one of the numerous resorts, whatever that means, and it just skipped on me. Sometimes this thing will skip on me, so just bear with me. I can get started again. I don't know what it did. I lost the page. Okay. It does this sometimes. It's very sensitive. That's one thing I found with this. Wow, I really lost it. Hang on. Give me a minute to find this. I'm so sorry about this. It did not have done this. I don't know where I'm at all with this book. So you're going to have to bear with me, because it did this, it skipped, and it shouldn't have. Oh, Lord. I don't know where I'm at, so you're going to have to work. Just bear with me. I have no clue where I'm at, because it just not only did it skip, it went like... It went like 10 or 15 pages forward or backwards, and I don't know where we went. So just bear with me. Dang nabbit. Oh, there it is. Okay, we're finally back. Okay. Jeez Louise. What I like about this, too, and I can't say enough about this book reading, was that, I did it again, see? Every time I go to enlarge it is what happens. I'm trying to get this up because, okay, there we go, the old mansion. I can't see well. So I'm trying to figure out. Let's try that. There we go. Because I need it like rather enlarged so I can see. All right, we're back. Sorry for the delay. I'll try not to touch it. But it's really, this pocketbook thing is really cool, except if you just barely tap it, it'll flip pages on you so you get totally lost. Let's try this again. The Old Mansion, no author. Down on Long Beach, that narrow strip of sand which stretches along the New Jersey coast from Barnegat Inlet on the north to Little Egg Harbor Inlet on the south, the summer sojourner at someone of the numerous resorts, which of late years have sprung up every few miles, may, in wandering over the sand dunes just across the bay from the village of Manahawkin, stumble over some charred timbers or vestiges of crumbling chimneys, showing that once, years back, a human habitation has stood there. If the find rouses the jaded curiosity of the visitor sufficiently to impel him to question the weather-beaten old bayman who sails him on his fishing trips, he will learn that these relics mark the site of one of the first summer hotels erected on the New Jersey coast. Bit of warning, these books are written, and the reason why they're out of copyright is because these books were written in the early to late 1800s all the way to 1944. So some of the stuff that's phrased in here, I'll try to work around it if it's offensive to today's standards, but if I don't, that's why. Please do not turn me into Facebook police or YouTube police or whatever police out there. It's just because this is just how the books are written. That's where the old mansion stood. He will be informed by Captain Nate or Captain Sam, or whatever particular captain it may chance to be. And if by good fortune it chances to be Captain Jim, he will hear a story that will pleasantly pass the long wait for a sheep's head bite. It was my good luck to have secured Captain Jim for preceptor in the angler's art during my vacation last summer, and his stories and reminiscences of Long Beach were not the least enjoyable features of the 2 weeks sojourn. Captain Jim was not garrulous. Few of the baymen are. They are sturdy, self-reliant, self-controlled people, full of strong common sense, but still, with that firm belief in the supernatural which seems inherent in the dwellers by the sea. The old mansion, said Captain Jim, or the Mansion of Health, for that was its full name, was built away back in 1822, so I've heard my father say. There had been a tavern close by years before that was kept by a man named Cranmer, and people used to come from Philadelphia by stage, 60 miles through the pines to Hawken, and then cross here by boat. Some would stop at Cranmer's, and others went on down the beach to Homer's, which was clear down at the end of the inlet. Finally, some of the wealthy people concluded that they wanted better accommodations than Cranmer gave. So they formed the Great Swamp Long Beach Company and built the Mansion of Health. I've heard that when it was built, it was the biggest hotel on the coast and was considered a wonder. It was 120 feet long, 3 stories high, and had a porch running all the way around it, with a balcony on top. It was certainly a big thing for those days. I've heard Father tell many a time on the stage of the stage loads of gay people that used to come rattling into the Hawken, each stage drawn by 4 horses, and sometimes 4 or 5 of them a day in the summer. A good many people, too, used to come in their own carriages and leave them over on the mainland until they were ready to go home. Those were happy times at the old mansion then. And it made times good for the people along shore, too. How long did the old mansion flourish, Captain? I asked. Well, for 25 or 30 years. People came there summer after summer. Then they built a railroad to Cape May, and that, with the ghosts, settled the Mansion of Health. What do you mean with the ghosts? I demanded. Well, you see, said Captain Jim, cutting off a mouthful of Navy plug. The story got around that the old house was haunted. Some people said there were queer things seen there, and strange noises were heard that nobody could account for. And pretty soon the place got a bad name, and visitors were so few that it didn't pay to keep it open anymore. But how did it get the name of being haunted, Captain Jim? I persisted. Why, it was this way, continued the mariner. Maybe you've heard of the time early in the 50s, when the Powhatan was wrecked on the beach here, and every soul on board was lost. She was an immigrant ship, and there were over 400 people aboard, passengers and crew. She came ashore here during a storm in September. There wasn't any life-saving stations in the days, and everyone was drowned. You can see the long graves now over in the Hawken churchyard, where the bodies were buried after they came ashore. They put them in 3 long trenches that were dug from one end of the burying ground to the other. The only people on the beach that night was the man who took care of the old mansion. He lived there with his family, and his son-in-law lived with him. He was the wreck master for this part of the coast, too. It wasn't till the second day that people from the Hawken could get over to the beach, and by the time the bodies had all come ashore, and the wreckmaster had them all piled up on the sand. I was a youngster then, and came over with my father, and I tell you, it was the awfulest sight I ever saw. Them long rows of drowned bodies, all lying there with their white, still faces turned up to the sky. Some were women, with their unalive babies clasped right in their arms, and some were husbands and wives, whose bodies came ashore locked together in an unalive embrace. I'll never forget that sight as long as I live. Well, when the coroner came and took charge, he began to inquire whether any money or valuables had been found. But the wreckmaster declared that not a solitary coin had been washed ashore. People thought this was rather singular, as the immigrants were, most of them, well-to-do Germans, and were known to have brought a good deal of money with them. But it was concluded that it had gone down with the ship. Well, the poor immigrants were given a pauper's burial, and the people had begun to forget their suspicions until 3 or 4 months later there came another storm, and the sea broke clear over the beach, just below the old mansion, and washed away the sand. Next morning, early, 2 men from Hawken sailed across the bay and landed on the beach. They walked across on the hard bottom where the sea had washed across, and, when about halfway from the bay, one of the men saw something curious close up against the stump of an old cedar tree. He called the other man's attention to it, and they went over to the stump. What they found was a pile of leather money belts that would have filled a wheelbarrow. Every one was cut open and empty. They had been buried in the sand close by the old stump, and the sea had washed away the covering. The men didn't go any farther. They carried the belts to their boats and sailed back to Hawken as fast as the wind would take them. Of course, it made a big sensation, and everybody was satisfied that the wreckmaster had robbed the bodies, if he hadn't done anything worse. but there was no way to prove it, and so nothing was done. The wreckmaster didn't stay around here long after that, though. The people made it too hot for him, and he and his family went away south, where it was said he bought a big plantation and a lot of slaves. Years afterward, the story came to Hawkins somehow that he was killed in a barroom brawl, and that his son-in-law was drowned by his boat upsetting while he was out fishing. I don't furnish any affidavits with that part of the story, though. However, after that, nobody lived in the old mansion for long at a time. People would go there, stay a week or two, and leave. And at last, it was given up entirely to beach parties in the daytime and ghosts at night. But, Captain, you don't really believe the ghost part, do you? I asked. Captain Jim looked down the bay, expectorated gravely over the side of the boat, and answered slowly, Well, I don't know, as I would have believed in him if I hadn't seen the ghost. What? I exclaimed. You saw it? Tell me about it. I've always wanted to see a ghost, or next best thing, a man who has seen one. It was one August, about 1861, said the captain. I was a young feller then, and with a half-dozen more was over on the beach, cutting salt hay. We didn't go home at nights, but we did our own cooking in the old mansion kitchen, and at nights slept on piles of hay upstairs. We were a reckless lot of scamps, and reckoned that no ghost could scare us. There was a big full moon that night, and it was as light as day. The musketeers was pretty bad, too, and it was easier to stay awake than go to sleep. Along toward midnight, me and two other fellers went out on the old balcony and began to race around the house. We hollered and yelled and chased each other for half an hour or so, and then we concluded we had better go to sleep. So we started for the window of the room where the rest were. This window was near one end of the ocean side, and as I came around the corner, I stopped, as if I'd been shot, and my hair raised straight up on the top of my head. Right there in front of that window stood a woman looking out over the sea, and in her arms she held a little child. I saw her as plain as I see you now. It seemed to me like an hour she stood there, but I don't suppose it was a second. Then she was gone. When I could move, I looked around for the other boys, and they were standing there paralyzed. They had seen the woman, too. We didn't say much, and we didn't sleep much that night. And the next night, we bunked out on the beach. The rest of the crowd made all manner of fun of us, but we had all the ghosts we wanted, and I never set foot inside the old house after that. When did it burn down, Captain? I asked, as Jim relapsed into silence. Somewhere about 25 years ago. A beach party had been roasting clams in the old oven, and in some way the fire got to the woodwork. It was as dry as tinder, and I hoped the ghosts were all burned up with it. That's the end of that story. Continuing. A misfit ghost? No author. I'll not say it again because the page, I see I jump. So, a misfit ghost, no author. Every boy with a knowledge of adventurous literature, otherwise novels of action, knows of the Phantom Ship, the spook of the high seas. But it has not been known that ships themselves are haunted, and that, in the service of the United States Coast Survey, there is a vessel now in commission that is by her own officers supposed to be haunted. Yet the Egray, a 140-foot schooner of the Coast Survey, is looked upon in the service as a very undesirable vessel to be aboard of. About her there is an atmosphere of gloom that wardroom just cannot dispel. Duty on board her has been shunned, as would be a pestilence, and stories have been told by officers who have cruised aboard her that are not good for timid people to hear. Officers have hesitated about telling these uncanny stories, but they have become sufficiently well known to make a billet to duty aboard the Egray unwelcome among the Coast Survey men. The Mohawk was launched June 10, 1875, at Greenpoint, and she was then the largest sailing yacht afloat. William T. Garner, her young millionaire owner, was very proud of his new craft, and all the then leaders of New York society were invited to participate in the good time afloat with which her launching was celebrated. Commodore Garner, then but 33 years old, and his young wife entertained charmingly, and the trim, speedy Mohawk was christened with unusually merry festivities. Soon after that, she was capsized by a sudden squall off the landing at Stapleton, New York, and 6 people were drowned like rats in her cabin and forecastle. Then the Mohawk was raised at a cost of $25,000 and purchased by the United States government for the service of the Coast Survey. Her name was changed to Egray. for Jack Tar is proverbially superstitious, and with the old name, it would have been impossible to ship a crew. Lieutenant Higby King describes its initial experience when he was assigned to duty on the Egret in this way. She had her full complement of officers minus one when I boarded her at Newport to complete the list. Every cabin was occupied but the port cabin by the companionway, and to that I was assigned. We had a jolly wardroom mess that night, and I retired from it early, as I was tired by my journey to join the vessel. The others, who were still at the table, regarded my retirement to the port cabin in absolute silence, having bidden me good night. Their silence did not lead me to suspect anything, though I knew that the Egret had once been the Mohawk. My cabin door had the usual cabin lock of brass, and the porthole was also securely fastened. There could have been no one under the bed or sofa, as beneath each was a facing of solid oak paneling. I undressed lazily and left the light burning dimly in my bracket lamp. I tried conscientiously to go to sleep, for I don't know how long, with my back turned to the light. The noise ceased in the wardroom after a time, and I knew the others had turned in, but I felt unaccountably nervous and restless. I turned over and faced the light, thoroughly wide awake. And there, in the single chair, sat an elderly man, seemingly wrapped in deep thought. He was dressed in a blue yachting reefer, and had a long gray beard. His hands were clasped in his lap, and his eyes were downcast. His face was not pale or ghastly, as the faces of ghosts are popularly supposed to be, but ruddy and weather-beaten. I regarded him in scared silence, for I didn't know how long, though it seemed an hour, when he or it, or whatever it was, disappeared. During that time the ghost, and such I now believe it to have been, made not a motion, nor did it say anything. Presently I looked again, and it was gone. At breakfast the others watched me critically as I took my seat. I had not intended to say anything about my experience, for I thought then I had seen some sort of hallucination, and strongly suspected that I was verging on insanity. Lieutenant Irving asked me if I had slept well. I replied that I had. "Didn't you see anything?" he inquired. I then frankly admitted that I had, and described my experience. Then I learned that each one of the 7 others present had tried the port cabin at one time or another, and each had seen the self-same apparition. It had acted in exactly the same way in each case, except in the case of Irving, who shot at it with his pistol, when it immediately disappeared. Some of the others had been led by their curiosity to inquire if anyone lost on the Mohawk resembled the figure, and found that none of the unfortunate ones at all fitted the description. It had been dubbed by them the misfit ghost. That one experience was enough for me, and after that, by courtesy, I shared the cabin of another fellow. Lieutenant Irving and others corroborated the story of Lieutenant King, and as additional evidence that the Egret is haunted. Egret. Lieutenant Irving describes a New Year's Eve experience of the Egret's officers that is, to say the least, novel in the way of supernatural manifestations. It was at the mess, the first toast, sweethearts and wives, had been drunk, as it always is by Yankee sailors the world over on occasions of festivity. Everyone was feeling happy, or, as Thackeray has it, pleasant, when suddenly the sliding doors separating the wardroom from the companionway closed slowly with a loud, squeaking noise. There we go. See? Okay. Thought I'd add some effects. They had seldom been closed, and it took the entire strength of a man to start them from their rusty fastings. Yet, upon this occasion, they started easily and closed tightly, while the officers jumped to their feet in breathless astonishment. Half a dozen men hauled them open in haste, but not a soul was behind them or anywhere about. "It must be our old friend of the port cabin," suggested one, and in awe-stricken silence, the health of the misfit ghost was drunk. Okay. An unbidden guest. No author. My cousins Kate and Tom Howard, married at Trinity at Easter time, concluded to commence housekeeping by taking one of those delightfully expensively furnished, unfurnished cottages with which the fashionable watering place of W abounds. Don't know what that is. W abounds. From whose rear windows one might almost take a plunge into the surf, the beach beginning at the back door. They went down quite early in May, being in a great hurry to try their domestic experiment, and, as the evenings were still cold, they spent them about the open fire. spooning. It was upon one of these nights, about 11 o'clock, that they were startled by a noise, as of some small object falling, soon followed by the sound of heavy footsteps, and then quiet again reigned supreme. At once Tom, poker in hand, boldly started in search of the burglar, followed by Kate, wildly clutching at his coat tail, and in a state of tremor. They looked upstairs, under the various beds, Kate suggesting that in novels they were always to be found there. The dining room was next explored, where all seemed well. And lastly, the kitchen, where they found what was evidently a solution of the mystery. The burglar had entered by the back door, which was found to be unlocked and slightly ajar. The first excitement subsiding, they returned again to the dining room, where Tom, upon closer inspection, then discovered that one of the pair of quaint little pepper pots, wedding gifts, was missing, and other small articles on the sideboard had been slightly disturbed. The next morning, when Kate mildly remonstrated with the queen of the kitchen for her carelessness, she received a shock by being told that it was her usual custom to leave the door open, so that it would be easy, convenient, like for the milkmaid. They parted with her, and a new maid was engaged, whose chief qualification for the place was that she was most faithful in the discharge of her duties, especially in locking up. While they mourned the loss of the pepper pot, still it seemed so trifling when they thought of that lovely repulse salad bowl sent by Aunt Julia, which stood nearby, that nothing was said of the loss outside of the family, and the little household settled into its normal state once more of billing and cooing. About a fortnight later, Tom started out one night with an old fisherman, one of the natives, and a local character, to indulge in their delightful pastime, so dear to the heart of a man known as Ealing, and, as the night was dark, the eels were particularly sporty, so that it was well on towards the wee small hours of the morning, when Tom at last returned to the cottage. He found all excitement within. Kate was in hysterics, and the new maid, also weeping, was industriously applying the camphor bottle to her mistress's nose. The burglar or ghost, as they had now decided, the windows and doors being found to be securely locked this time, had been abroad again, but had succeeded in purloining nothing. His royal ghost ship had amused himself, apparently, by simply walking about. "Oh, Tom, he had on such heavy boots, and was so dreadfully bold about it," said Kate tearfully. From that time, Kate became nervous and refused to be left alone. Tom started whenever a door creaked. See, you can do this. See, made the door creak. There you go. And the treasurer departed hurriedly, saying, "Faith in the house, faith, faith, the house is haunted, sure." After that, Kate spent her days in grill hunting, and her nights in answering shadowy advertisements that never materialized. They tried Irish, English, Dutch, and a heathen Chinese. I'm sorry, like I said, I rolled right over it. And a heathen Asian, with the sparkling of, I'm not going to even say this word, with the sparkling of Native American ladies to vary the monotony. They seemed about to become famous throughout the length and breadth of the land as the family that changes help once a week, when they landed treasure number 2. Shortly after her advent, we were all asked down to W to help celebrate their happiness, and incidentally to christen the new dinner set. We were not a little surprised at finding Kate so pale and Tom rather distant. However, after a delightful dinner that should have filled with pleasure the most exacting bride, we adjourned to the piazza, leaving the men to the contemplation of their cigars. We were enthusiastic in our praise of the house, and congratulated Kate in securing such a prize, when, to our horror, she burst into tears and said, "Oh, girls, it's a dreadful place, it's haunted," and then cheerfully proceeded with the details until we all felt creepy and suggested the parlor and lights. It was not until long afterwards that Kate discovered that Tom had also related the ghost story to the men that evening, to which Ned Harris had said, "Rats," and Bob Shaw laughingly remarked, "Tom, old chap, you really shouldn't take your nightcap so strong." After the 1st of July, the climax came. The ghost walked again, this time taking not only the remaining pepper pot, but also a silver salt cellar. Evidently, he had a penchant for small articles, but unlike former times, everything on the sideboard was in the greatest disorder. Aunt Julia's salad bowl was found on the floor, and not far away, the cheese dish, with its contents scattered about. This time, one of the windows was found half open. A week later, a note came to me from Kate, saying that she and Tom had gone to Saratoga to spend the remainder of the season with her mother. The following spring, Tom received a note and parcel from Mr. B, the owner of the house at W, which read as follows. Dear Mr. Howard, I send you by express 3 articles of silver, which my wife suggests may belong to you, as they are marked with your initials, namely, 2 silver pepper pots and a salt cellar. They were found the other day, during the process of spring house cleaning, in a rat hole, behind the sideboard. I forgot to have the hole stopped up last spring, or to caution you against the water rats. The great fellows will get in, you know. Kind regards to Mr. Howard. Very truly yours, John B. The next season, the Ghost Club was organized. The badge being a small silver rat, bearing proudly aloft a tiny pepper pot. We thoughtfully offered Tom the presidency, but he declined with offended dignity, from the effects of which I think he will never fully recover. Okay, that one was a good one. Okay, and it makes sense. I've seen pretty good-sized rats in my lifetime too. See, like I said, some of these are true ghost stories, some of them aren't. You decide. Obviously, that one was not a true ghost story. The Dead Woman's Photograph. No author. Virgil Hoyt is a photographer's assistant up at St. Paul, and a man of good deal of taste. He has been in search of the picturesque all over the West and hundreds of miles to the north in Canada, and can speak 3 or 4 Indian dialects, and put a canoe through the rapids. That is to say, he is a man of an adventurous spirit and no dreamer. He can fight well and shoot well and swim well enough to put up a winning race with the Native American boys. And he can sit all day in the saddle and not dream about it at night. Wherever he goes, he uses his camera. The world. Hoyt is in the habit of saying to those who sit with him when he smokes his pipe, was created in 6 days to be photographed. Man, and especially woman, was made for the same purpose. Clouds are not made to give moisture, nor trees to cast shade. They were created for the photographer. As a photographer, I like this guy already. In short, Virgil Hoyt's view of the world is whimsical, and he doesn't like to be bothered with anything disagreeable. That is the reason that he loathes and detests going into a house of mourning to photograph a corpse. The horribly bad taste of it offends him far. Me too. And partly he is annoyed at having to shoulder, even for a few moments, a part of someone's burden of sorrow. He doesn't like sorrow, and would willingly canoe 500 miles up the cold Canadian rivers to get rid of it. Nevertheless, as assistant photographer, it is often his duty to do this very kind of thing. Not long ago, he was sent by a rich Jewish family at St. Paul to photograph the mother, who had just died. He was very much put out, but he went. He was taken to the front parlor, where the dead woman lay in her coffin. It was evident that there was some excitement in the household, and that a discussion was going on, but Hoyt wasn't concerned, and so he paid no attention to the matter. The daughter wanted the coffin turned on end, in order that the corpse might face the camera properly, but Hoyt said he could overcome the recumbent attitude and make it appear that the face was taken in the position it would naturally hold in life. And so they went out and left him alone with the dead. The face was a strong and positive one, such as may often be seen among Jewish matrons. Hoyt regarded it with some admiration, thinking to himself that she was a woman who had been used to having her own way. There was a strand of hair out of place, and he pushed it back from her brow. A bud lifted its head too high from among the roses on her breast and spoiled the contour of the chin, so he broke it off. He remembered these things later very distinctly, and that his hand touched her bare face 2 or 3 times. Then he took the photographs and left the house. He was very busy at the time, and several days elapsed before he was able to develop the plates. He took them from the bath in which they had lain with a number of others, and went to work upon them. There were 3 plates, he having taken that number merely as a precaution against any accident. They came up well, but as they developed, he became aware of the existence of something in the photograph which had not been apparent to his eyes. The mysterious always came under the head of the disagreeable with him, and was therefore to be banished. So he made only a few prints and put the things out of sight. He hoped that something would intervene to save him from attempting the explanation. But it is a part of the general perplexity of life that things do not intervene as they ought, and when they ought. So one day his employer asked him what had become of those photographs. He said they left him alone with the dead. Whoa. Okay. Sometimes they'll throw up a sentence that doesn't belong there, just the way it was printed. So, okay, ignore that. He tried to evade him, but it was futile. And he got out the finished photographs and showed them to him. The older man sat staring at them a long time. Hoyt, said he at length, you're a young man, and I suppose you have never seen anything like this before, but I have. Not exactly the same thing, but similar phenomena have come my way a number of times since I went into business. And I want to tell you, there are things in heaven and earth not dreamt of. Oh, I know all that Tommy rot, cried Hoyt angrily. But when anything happens, I want to know the reason why and how it is done. All right, said his employer. Then you might explain why and how the sun rises. But he humbled the younger man sufficiently to examine with him the bath in which the plates were submerged and the plates themselves. All was as it should be, but the mystery was there and could not be done away with. Hoyt hoped against hope that the friends of the dead woman would somehow forget about the photographs. But, of course, the wish was unreasonable, and one day the daughter appeared and asked to see the photographs of her mother. Well, to tell the truth, stammered Hoyt, those didn't come out, as well as we could wish. But let me see them, persisted the lady. I'd like to look at them anyway. He showed her the prints. Well, now, said Hoyt, trying to be soothing, as he believed it was always best to be with women, to tell the truth. He was an ignoramus where women were concerned. I think it would be better if you didn't see them. There are reasons why. He ambled on like this, stupid man that he was, and of course the woman said that she would see the pictures without any further delay. So poor Hoyt brought them out and placed them in her hand, and then ran for the water pitcher, and had to be at the bother of bathing her forehead to keep her from fainting. For what the lady saw was this. Over face and flowers and the head of the coffin fell a thick veil, the edges of which touched the floor in some places. It covered the features so well that not a hint of them was visible. There was nothing over Mother's face, cried the lady at length. There was nothing over Mother's face, cried the lady at length. Not a thing, said Hoyt. I know because I had occasion to touch her face just before I took the picture. I put some of her hair back from her brow. What does it mean, then? Asked the lady. You know better than I. There's no explanation in science. Perhaps there's some in psychology. Well, said the lady, stammering a little and coloring, Mother was a good woman, but she always wanted her own way, and she always had it, too. Yes? And she, excuse me, she never would have her picture taken. She didn't admire herself. She said no one should ever take a picture of hers. Ever see a picture of hers. So, said Hoyt. Well, she's kept her word, hasn't she? The two stood looking at the pictures for a time. Then Hoyt pointed to the open blaze in the grate. Throw them in, he commanded. Don't let your father see them. Don't keep them to yourself. They wouldn't be good things to keep. That's true enough, said the lady, slowly. And then she threw them in the fire. Then Virgil Hoyt brought out the plates and broke them before her eyes. And that was the end of it, except that Hoyt sometimes tells the story to those who sit beside him when his pipe is lit. Interesting. That, doing this all these years, that could happen. Excuse me, I just wrenched my leg a little bit. Next story. This one is called The Ghost of a Live Man. No author. We were in the South Atlantic Ocean, in the latitude of the island of Fernando Noronha. About 40 degrees, 12 minutes south, on board the bark H.G. Johnson, homeward bound from Australia. I was the only passenger, and we had safely rounded Cape Horn, with the barometer at 28 degrees 18 minutes, and yet had somehow miraculously escaped any extremely heavy gale. Had light northerly and easterly winds till we reached 20 degrees, and thence the southeast trades were sending us fast on our way to the equator. I sat on deck smoking my pipe, with a glorious full moon shedding its bright pathway across the blue waters, and chatting with the first mate, a man some 58 years of age, who had followed the sea since he was a boy. For 20 years or more, he had been mate or captain, and many and varied were the experiences he could relate. A thorough sailor and skillful navigator, he was as honest as the day is long, had a heart as big as an ox, and was an all-round good fellow and genial companion. Some of his yarns might be taken cum grano salis, Yet he always positively assured me that he was telling me the truth. An account of a voyage that he made in a whaler from the Southern Ocean to New Bedford seemed to me worthy to be repeated. He had rounded Cape Horn 6 times and the Cape of Good Hope 26 times, besides making many trips across the Western Ocean and to South American ports. I give his account as near as possible in his own words. It was in 71 that I commanded the whaler Mary Jane. Hang on 1 second. Okay. We had been out from home over 3 years and had on board a full cargo of whale oil, besides 2,000 pounds of whale bone, which was then worth $5 per pound. I also had been fortunate enough to find in a dead whale, which we came across a large quantity of ambergris, and our hearts were all very light as we began our homeward voyage, and our thoughts all tended to the hearty welcome which we should receive from wives and sweethearts when we reached our journey's end. Many a night as I lay in my berth, I had thought with great pleasure of the amount of money that would be coming to me from the proceeds of our voyage when we arrived in New Bedford. I calculated that I had made $12,000 as my share of the proceeds of the whalebone and oil, to say something of the ambergris, which I well knew would bring in at least $20,000, and one half of which belonged to me. You can therefore imagine that I was well pleased with myself as we went bounding along through the southeast trades. We crossed the equator in longitude 36 and soon after took strong northeast trades, and all was going well as I could wish. We had put the ship in perfect order, painted her inside and out, and you would never have recognized her as the old whaling ship that had for 3 years been plying the Southern Ocean for whales. Never shall I forget an old bull whale that we tackled about 2 degrees to the south of Cape Horn. But that is another story, which I'll give you another time. We had just lost the northeast trades and were entering the Gulf Stream. I sat in my cabin with my chart on the table before me rolled up. I just picked our location up and was thinking that in a week more I should be at home, surrounded by those near and dear to me, and relating to them the story of my great good fortune. It was always my custom to work up my latitude and longitude about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then after supper pick off her position on the chart, have a smoke, and perhaps, just before retiring, a nip of grog, and then at 8:30 o'clock, as regular as a clock, I would turn in. I'm a great smoker, and to this day I had been smoking all the afternoon, besides having had 2 or 3 nips. We had a dog on board, whom we called Bosun, who had been out with us all the voyages, and who was afraid of nothing. He had endeared himself to every man on board, and when Bosun took water, something very serious was in the wind. This night, as I sat in the cabin, I heard a most dismal howl from Bosun, and called out to the mate to know what was the matter with the dog. He replied that he reckoned some of the men had been teasing him, and the occurrence soon passed from my mind. Suddenly, I saw someone coming down the after companionway into the cabin. I supposed at first it was a mate, and wondered why that he had not first spoken to me. But then I noticed that he wore clothes I had never seen on the mate. And as he advanced into the cabin, I saw his face. It was the face of a man I had never seen in my life. He was thin and pale and haggard, and as he advanced, he looked about the cabin and at the rolled-up chart on the table. There seemed to be an appeal in his eyes, and then there swept over his face a look of intense disappointment, and before I could move or speak, he had vanished from my sight. Now, I'm a very practical man, and I at once straightened myself in my chair and said to myself, "Well, old man, you have smoked 1 too many pipes today, or else you have had 1 drink too much, for you have been asleep in your chair and seen a ghost." I was quite satisfied that I had had a dream, especially as I called to the mate and asked him if he had seen anyone come below. He said no, that he had not left the deck for the last hour, and the man at the wheel, directly in front of the door, was sure no one had entered the cabin. So I convinced myself that I had had a very vivid dream, though I could not help thinking of the matter all through the next day. At 8 o'clock the next evening, I sat in the same place with my work just finished, and the chart lying rolled up on the table before me, when suddenly the dog's dismal howl rang through the ship, and looking up, I saw those same legs coming down the after companion. My hair fairly stood on end, and yet, today, surely I was wide awake. I had only smoked 1 pipe all day, and had not touched a drop of liquor. The same one The same one emaciated figure walked into the cabin, glanced inquiringly and appealingly at me, and again there spread over his face that look of utter disappointment, as if he had sought something and failed to find it. And again he disappeared. I rushed on deck to the mate and told him all that I had seen during the last 2 nights, but he made light of it and assured me I had been asleep or smoking too much. He did not like to suggest that I had been drinking. Still, I could see that the thought came into his mind was, the old man has seen him again. I gave up trying to convince him, but requested that the next night from 8 to 8:30 he should sit with me in the cabin. How the next day passed I cannot tell. I only know that my thoughts never left that ghostly visitant, and somehow I felt that the evening would reveal something to me and the spell be broken. I made up my mind I would speak to the thing, whatever it was, and I felt a sort of security in the presence of the mate, who was daring to follow and fear nothing, man nor the devil. Neither rum nor tobacco passed my lips during the next day, and at 8 o'clock found the mate and I sitting in the cabin, and this time the chart lay open on the table beside us. Just 8 bells struck, the dog's wail sounded, and looking up we both saw the figure descending the cabin stairs. We both seemed frozen to our seats, and the strange weirdness of the whole proceeding cast the same spell over the mate and me alike, and we were both unable to move or speak. Slowly the figure proceeded into the cabin, and glanced around without a word, but with the same expectant look on his face. His form was even more wasted, his cheeks sunken, and his eyes seemed almost out of sight, so deeply were they set in their sockets. As his eye fell on the open chart, a look of supreme joy fairly irradiated his features, and advancing to the table, he placed one long bony finger on the chart, held it for a moment, and then again disappeared from our sight. For 5 minutes after he left us, we sat speechless. Then I managed to say, "What do you think of that, Mr. Morris?" "My God, sir, I don't know. It's beyond me." Then my eyes fell on the open chart, and there where the finger had been was a tiny spot of blood, exactly on the point of longitude 63 degrees west and latitude 37 degrees north. We were then only about 50 miles distant from that position, and immediately there came to me the determination to steer the ship there. So I laid her course accordingly, and pulled the lookout of the crow's nest. At 5 o'clock in the morning, just as the east began to grow gray, the lookout called out, "Boat on the lee bow!" And as we came up to it, we found 4 men in it, 3 dead, and one with just a remnant of life left in him. We sewed the 3 bodies in canvas and buried them in the ocean, and then gave all of our attention to restoring life to the poor emaciated frame, which I then recognized was the very man who for 3 successive nights had visited me in my cabin. My judicious and careful nursing life gradually came back to him. In 4 days, when he was able to sit up and talk with me in the cabin, it seems he commanded the ship Promise, and she had taken fire and had been destroyed, and all hands had to take to the boats. 10 were in the boats at first, but their food had given out, and one by one he had seen them unalive, and one by one he had cast the bodies overboard. Finally, he lost consciousness, and knew not whether his 3 remaining companions were unalive or alive. Then he said he seemed in a dream to see a ship, and tried to go to her for help. But just as he would be going on board of her, something would seem to keep him back. 3 times in his dreams he tried to visit the ship, and the last time there seemed to come to him a certain satisfaction, and he felt that he had succeeded in his object. Turning to my table, he said, "Let me take your chart. I'll show you just where we were." "Stop," said I. "Don't take that chart. It is an old one and all marked over. Mark your position on this new one." He took my pencil and knife and carefully sharpened his pencil. Then, taking my dividers, he measured his latitude and longitude and placed the pencil dot at a point on the clean chart. As he lifted his hand from it, he said, "Oh, excuse me, Captain. I cut my finger in sharpening the pencil, and I've left a drop of blood on the chart." "Never mind," said I. "Leave it there." And then I produced the old chart, and there, in the exactly corresponding place, was the drop of blood left by the ghostly visitor. Then, looking steadily into my face, the man solemnly added, "I can't explain this, sir. Perhaps you can, but I can tell you, on my honor, it is God's own truth that I have told you." Okay. Next story, The Ghost of Washington, no author. It was early on Christmas morning when John Riley wheeled away from picturesque little village where he had passed the previous night to continue his cycling tour through eastern Pennsylvania. Today, his intention was to stop at Valley Forge and then to ride on up to Schuylkill Valley, visiting in turn the many points of historical interest that lay along his route. Valley Forge, his road map indicated, was but a short distance further on. All around him were the hills and fields and roads over which Washington and his half-starved army had forged and roamed throughout the trying winter of 1777 to 78, 126 years ago. It was a beautiful Christmas day, truly, and as he wheeled along, young Riley's thoughts were almost equally divided between the surrounding pleasant scenery and the folks at home, who, he knew very well, were assembling at just about the present time around a heavily laden Christmas tree in the front parlor. The sun rose higher and higher, but Riley pedaled on down the alley, passing every now and then quaint, pleasant-looking farmhouses, many which, no doubt, had been built anterior to the period which was given the vicinity of its history. Arriving finally at a place where the road forked off in two different directions, Riley was puzzled which way to go on. There happened to be a dwelling close by. Accordingly, he dismounted, left his wheel leaning against a gate post at the side of the road, and walked up a wretchedly flagged walk leading to the house, and the idea of getting instructions from his inmates. Situated in the center of an unkempt field of rank grass and weeds, the building lay back from the highway probably 150 feet. It was long and low in shape, containing but one story, and having what is termed a gabled roof, under which there must have been an attic of no mean size. On coming close to the house, a fact Riley had not noticed from the road became plainly evident. It was deserted. He saw that the roof and side shingles were in wretched condition, that the window sashes and frames, as well as the doors and door frames, were missing from the openings in the side walls where once they had been, and that the entire side of the house, including that part of the stone foundation which showed above the ground, was full of cracks and seams. At first, on the point of turning back, he concluded to see what the interior was like anyway. Accordingly, he went inside. Glancing around the large dust-filled room he had entered, his gaze at first failed to locate any object. A rickety appearing set of steps went up into the attic from one side of the apartment, and over in one corner was a large open fireplace, from the walls of which much of the brickwork had become loosened and fallen out. Riley had started up the steps towards the attic, when, happening to look back for an instant, his attention was attracted to a singular-looking jug-shaped bottle no larger than a vinegar cruet, which lay upon its side covered up by debris of loose bricks and mortar. He hastened back down the steps and crossed the room, taking the bottle up in his hand and examining it with curiosity. Being partly filled with a liquid of some kind, or rather, the bottle was very soon uncorked and held under the young man's nose. The liquid gave forth a peculiar, pungent, and inviting odor. Without further hesitation, Riley's lips sought the neck of the bottle. It is hardly possible to describe the pleasure and satisfaction his senses experienced as he drank. While the fluid was still gurgling down his throat, a heavy hand was placed most suddenly on his shoulder, and his body was given a violent shaking. The bottle fell to the floor and was broken into 100 pieces. "Hello," said a rough voice almost in Riley's ear. "Who are you, anyway? And what are you doing within the lines? A spy? I'll be bound." As most assuredly there had been no one else in the vicinity of the building when he had entered it, and, with equal certainty, no one had come down the steps from the attic, Riley was naturally surprised and mystified by this unexpected assault. He struggled instinctively to break loose from the unfriendly grasp, and when he finally succeeded, he twisted his body around so that he faced across the room. Immediately, he made the remarkable discovery that there were 4 other persons in the apartment. There, uncouth-looking fellows habited in fantastic but ragged garments, and a matronly-looking woman, the latter standing over a wash-tub which had been elevated upon the 2 chairs in a corner near the fireplace. To all appearances, the woman had been busy at her work and had stopped for the moment to see what the men were going to do. Her waist sleeves were rolled up to the shoulders, and her arms dripped with water and soap suds. Over the tops of the tubs, partly filled with water, there were visible the edges of several well-soaked fabrics. To add to his astonishment, he noticed that in the chimney place, which a moment before was falling apart, but now seemed to be clean and in good condition, a cheerful fire burned, and that above the flames was suspended an iron pot, from which issued a jet of steam. He noticed also that the entire appearance of the room had undergone a great change. Everything seemed to be in good repair, tidy and neat. The ceilings, the walls, and the door, even the stairway leading to the attic. The openings in the walls were fitted with window sashes and well-painted doors. The apartment had, in fact, evolved under his very eyesight from a state of absolute ruin into one of excellent preservation. All of this seemed so weird and uncanny that Riley stood for a moment or two in the transformed apartment, utterly dumbfounded, with his mouth wide open and his eyes all but popping out of his head. He was brought to his senses by the fellow who had shaken him, growling out. "Come, explain yourself." "An explanation is due me," Riley managed to gasp. "Don't bandy words with the rascal, Harry." One of the other men spoke up. "Bring him along to headquarters." Thereupon, without further parley, the three men marched Riley in military fashion into the open air and down the road. Here he picked up at the gate post his bicycle, while they unstacked a group of 3 old-fashioned looking muskets located close by. When the young man had entered the house a few minutes before, this stack of arms had not been there. He could not understand it. Neither could he understand, on looking back at the building as he was marched off down the road, the mysterious agency that had transformed its dilapidated exterior, just as had the interior, into a practically new condition. While they trudged along, the strangers exhibited a singular interest in the wheel. Riley pushed by his side, running their coarse hands over the frame and handlebar, and acting on the whole as though they had never before seen a bicycle. This in itself was another surprise. He had hardly supposed there were 3 men in the country so totally unacquainted with what is a most familiar piece of mechanism everywhere. At the same time that they were paying so much attention to the wheel, Riley in turn was studying with great curiosity his singular-looking captors. Rough, unprepossessing appearing fellows they were, large frame and unshaven, and, it must be added, dirty of face. What remained of their very ragged clothing, he had already noticed, was of most remarkable cut and design, resembling closely the garments worn by the Continental military men of the War of Independence. The hats were broad, low-crowned, and 3-cornered in shape. The trousers were buff-colored and ended at the knees, and the long blue spike-tail coats were flapped over at the extremities of the tails, the flaps being fastened down with good-sized brass buttons. Leather leggings were strapped around cowhide boots, through the badly worn feet of which, in places where the leather had cracked open, the flesh unprotected by stockings could be seen. Dressed as he was, in a cleanly gray cycling costume, Riley's appearance, most assuredly, was strongly in contrast to that of his companions. After a brisk walk of 20 minutes, during which they occasionally met and passed by 1 or 2, or perhaps a group of men clothed and outfitted like Riley's escorts, the little party followed the road up a slight incline and around a well-wooded bend to the left, coming quite suddenly, and to the captive very unexpectedly, to what was without doubt a military encampment, a village, in fact, composed of many rows of small log huts. Along the streets between the buildings, muskets were stacked in hundreds of places. Over at one corner, on a slight eminence commanding the road up which they had come, cleverly hidden from it behind trees and shrubbery, the young man noticed a battery of field pieces. Wherever the eye was turned on the singular scene were countless numbers of soldiers, all garmented in 3-cornered hats, spike-tailed coats, and knee breeches, walking lazily hither and thither, grouped around crackling fires, or parading up and down the streets in platoons under the guidance of ragged but stern-looking officers. Harry spotted the little procession of 4 in front of one of the larger of the log houses. Then, while they stood there, the long blast from a bugle was heard, followed by the roll of drums. I think he meant Riley. Riley stopped. A minute or 2 afterwards, several companies of militia marched up and grounded their arms, forming 3 sides of a hollow square around them, the 4th and open side being toward the log house. Directly succeeding this maneuver, there came through the doorway of the house and stepped the center of the square, stopping directly in front of Riley, a dignified-looking person, tall and straight, and splendidly proportioned figure, and having the face of great nobility and character. The cold chills chased one another down Riley's back. His limbs swayed and tottered beneath his weight. He had never experienced another such sensation of mingled astonishment and fright. He was in the presence of General Washington, Not a phantom Washington either, but Washington in the flesh and blood, as material and earthly a being as ever crossed a person's line of vision. Riley, in his time, had seen so many portraits, marble busts, as statues of the great commander that he could not be mistaken. Recovering the use of his faculties, which, for the moment, he seemed to have lost, Riley did the very commonplace thing that others before him have done when placed unexpectedly in remarkable situations. He pinched himself to make sure that he was in reality wide awake and in the natural possession of his senses. He felt like pinching the figure in front of him also, but he could not muster up the courage to do that. He stood there trying to think it all out, and as his thoughts became less stagnant, his fright dissolved under the process of reasoning his mind pursued. To reason a thing out, even though an explanation can only be obtained by leaving much of the subject unaccounted for, tends to make one bolder and less shaky in the knees. The series of strange incidents which he was experiencing had been inaugurated in the old-fashioned dwelling he had visited after information concerning the roads. And everything had been going along in a perfectly normal way up to the very moment when he had taken a drink from the bottle found in the fireplace. But from that precise time everything had gone wrongly. Hence, the inference that the drinking of the peculiar liquid was accountable in some way or other for his troubles. There was a supernatural agency in the whole thing. That much must be admitted. And whatever that agency was, and however it might be accounted for, it had taken Riley back into a period of time more than 100 years ago, and landed him, body and soul, within the lines of the Patriot forces wintering at Valley Forge. He might have stood there, turning over and over in his mind, pinching himself and muttering all the morning, had not the newcomer ceased a silent and curious inspection of his person, and asked, "Who are you, sir?" "John Riley, at your pleasure," the young man replied, adding a question on his own account. "And who are you, sir?" Immediately he received a heavy thump on the back from Harry's hard fist. "It is not for you to question the general," the ragged administrator of the blow exclaimed. "And it is not for you to be so gay," Riley returned angrily, giving the blow back with added force. "Hear, hear," broke in the first questioner. "Fisticuffs under my very nose. No more of this, I command you both." To Harry he added an extra caution. "Your zeal on my behalf will be better appreciated by being less demonstrative. Blows should be struck only on the battlefield." To Riley he said, with a slight smile hovering over his face, "My name is Washington. Perhaps you may have heard of me." To this Riley replied, "I have indeed, and heard you very well spoken of, too." Emboldened by the other's smile, he ventured another question. "I think my reckoning of the day and year is badly at fault. An hour ago, I thought the day was Christmas Day. How far out of the way did my calculation take me, sir? The day is indeed Christmas Day, and the year is, as you must know, the year of our Lord, 1777. Riley again pinched himself. "Why do you bring this man to me?" Washington now inquired, turning to Harry and his companions. "He is a spy, sir," said Harry. "That is a lie," Riley indignantly said. "I've done nothing to warrant any such charge." "We found him in the widow Robin's house, pouring strong liquor down his throat. I had gone inside after information concerning the roads, which he was getting from a bottle, sir." "If drinking from a bottle of necessity constitutes being a spy, I fear our camp is already a hotbed," Washington somewhat sagely remarked, casting his eye around slyly at his officers and men. "Tell me," he went on, with sudden sternness, looking Riley through and through, as though to read his very thoughts, "is the charge true? Did you come from Howe?" "The charge is not true, sir. I came from no one. I simply am making a tour of pleasure through this part of the country on my bicycle. With the country swarming with the men from two hostile armies, any kind of a tour, save one of absolute necessity, seems ill-timed. When I set out, I knew nothing about any armies. The fact is, sir—" Riley started to make an explanation, but he checked himself on realizing that the telling of any such improbable yarn would only increase the hazardousness of his position. "Well?" Washington questioned, in a tone of growing suspicion. "I certainly did not know that your army or any other army was quartered in this area." Riley hesitated for a lack of something further to say. "You see," he finally added, prompted by a happy idea, "I rode my wheel from New York." "You may have come from New York, though it is hard to believe you came on that singular-looking machine so great a distance. Where is the horse which drew the vehicle?" Riley touched his bicycle. "This is the horse, sir, just as it is the vehicle." The man is crazy, Harry exclaimed. Washington only looked at the... It looked... Washington only looked funny, especially as he felt. And this time asked a double question. How can a thing be balanced without it be held upright by a pair of shafts from a horse's back? And how is the motive power acquired? For an answer, Riley jumped upon the wheel and at a considerable speed and in a haphazard way pedaled around the space within the hollow square soldiers. Hither and thither he went, at 1 second nearly wheeling over the toes of the line of astonished, if not frightened, militiamen, at the next, bearing suddenly down on Harry and his companions and making them dance and jump about most alertly to avoid a collision. Even the dignified Washington was once or twice put to the necessity of dodging hurriedly aside when his equilibrium was threatened. Riley eventually dismounted, doing so with assumed clumsiness by stopping the wheel at Harry's back and falling over heavily against the soldier. Harry tumbled to the ground, but Riley mysteriously landed on his feet. And once he began offering a profuse apologies. You did that by design, Harry shouted, jumping to his feet. His face was red with anger, and he shook his fist, threatening at the bicyclist. Washington commanded the man to hold his peace. Then to Riley he expressed a great surprise at his performance and a desire to know more about the bicycle. The young man thereupon described the machine minutely, lifting it into the air and spinning the wheels to illustrate how smoothly they rotated. I can see it's possible to ride the contrivance with rapidly. It has been put together with wonderful ingenuity, Washington said, when Riley had replaced the wheel on the ground. And you, sir, it is but a toy, an officer spoke up. Put our friend on his bundle of tin and race him against one of our horsemen, and he would make a sorry showing. Riley smiled. I bear the gentleman no ill will for his opinion, he said. Still, I should like to show him by a practical test of the subject that his ignorance is most profound. You would test the speed of the machine against that of a horse, Washington said in amazement. I would, sir. You have a good road yonder. With your permission and a worthy opponent, I would make the test at once. But, sir, the man is a spy, Harry broke in. Would it not be better to throw a rope around his neck and give him his deserts? The charge is by no means proven, Washington replied, nor can it be until a court-martial convenes this afternoon. And I see no reason why we may not, in the meantime, enjoy the unique contest which has been suggested. It will make a pleasant break in the routine of camp life. A murmur of approval went up from the masses of men by whom they were surrounded. While they had been talking it somewhat seemed as though everybody in the camp, not already on the scene, had gathered together behind the square of infantry. Then, sir, Harry said, with some eagerness, I would like to be the man to ride the horse. There is no better animal than mine anywhere, and I understand his tricks and humors quite well enough to put him to this best pace. I confess, I have heard you well spoken of as a horseman, Washington said. Be away with you, saddle and bridle your horse at once. It was the chain of singular circumstances, narrated above, which brought John Riley into the most remarkable contest of his life. He had entered many bicycle races at one time or another, always with credit to himself and to the club whose colors he wore, and he had every expectation of making a good showing today. Yet a reflection of the weird conditions which had brought about the present contest took away some of his self-possession, when a few minutes later he was marched over to the turnpike and left to his own thoughts, while the officers were pacing out a 1 mile straightaway course down the road. After the measurements had been taken, 2 unbroken lines of soldiers were formed along the entire mile, a most evident precaution against Riley leaving the race course at any point to escape across the fields. Washington came up to him again when the preparations were completed, to shake his hand and whisper a word or two of encouragement in his ear. Having performed these kindly acts, he left to take up a position near the point of finish. The beginning of the course was located close to the battery of half-concealed field pieces. Riley was now conducted to this place. Shortly afterwards, Harry appeared on his horse. He leered at the bicycle contemptuously and said something of a sarcastic nature, partly under his breath, when the two lined up, side by side, for the start. To those slights, Riley paid no heed. He had a strong belief that when the race was over there would be left in the mutton-like head of his opponent very little of his present inclination toward the humorous. The soldier's mount was a handsome black mare, 14.5 hands high, strong of limbs, and at the flanks, and animated by a spirit that kept her prancing around with continuous action. It must be admitted that the man rode very well. He guided the animal with ease and nonchalance when she reared and plunged, and kept her movements confined to an incredibly small piece of ground, considering her abundance of action. "Keep to your own side of the road throughout the race. I don't want to be collided with by your big beast," Riley cautioned, while they were awaiting 2 signals from the starter. To this, Harry replied in some derision, "I'll give you a good share of the road at the start, and all of it at my desk too, afterwards." And then the officer held a pistol fired, the first shot. Riley was well satisfied with the conditions under which the race was to be made. The road was wide and level, smooth, hard, and straight, and the strong breeze which had sprung up blew squarely against his back. His wheel was geared up to 84 inches. The breeze promised to be a valuable aid in pushing it along. Awaiting the second and last signal, Riley glanced down the 2 blue ranks of soldiers, which stretched away into hazy lines in the distance, and converged at the termination of the course where a flag had been stuck in the ground. The soldiers were at parade rest, their unceasing movements as they chatted to one another, turning their bodies this way and that, and craning their heads forward to look toward the starting point, and then jerking them back, made the lines seem like long, squirming snakes. At the end of the course, a thick bunch of militiamen clogged the road and overspread into the fields. Crack! The signal to be off. Riley shoved aside the fellow who had been holding his wheel upright while astride of it, and pushed down on the pedals. The mare's hoofs hit the earth. Her great muscular legs straightened out. She sprang forward with a snort of apparent pleasure, taking the lead at the very start. Riley heard the shout of excitement run along the 2 ranks of soldiers. He saw them waving their arms and hats as he went by, and on ahead through the cloud of dust there was visible the shadow-like outlines of the snorting, galloping horse, whose hoofbeats sounded clear and sharp above the din which came from the sides of the highway. The mare crept farther and farther ahead. Very soon, 100 feet or more of the road lay between her and the bicyclist. Harry turned in the saddle and called out another sarcasm. "I shall pass you very soon." "Keep to your own side of the road," Riley shouted, not a bit daunted by the way the race commenced. His head was well down over the handlebars. His back had the shape of an upper portion of an immense egg. Up and down his legs moved, faster and faster and faster yet. He went by the soldiers so rapidly that they only appeared to be 2 streaks of blurry color. Their sharp, rasping shouts sounded like the cracking of musketry. The sound of dust blew against the bicyclist's head and into his mouth and throat. When he glanced ahead again, he saw with satisfaction that the mare was no longer increasing her lead. It soon became evident, even though he was slowly cutting down the advantages she had secured. Harry again turned his head shortly afterward, doubtless expecting to find his opponent hopelessly distanced by this time. Instead of this, Riley was alarmingly close upon him. The man ejaculated a sudden oath and lashed his animal furiously. Straining every nerve and sinew, the mare for the moment pushed further ahead. Then her pace slackened a bit, and Riley again crept up to her, closer and closer to her than before, until his head was abreast of her outstretched tail. Harry was lashing the mare and swearing at her unceasingly now. But she had spurted once and appeared to be incapable of again increasing her speed. In this way they went on for some little distance, Harry using his whip brutally, the mare desperately trying to attain a greater pace. Riley hanging on with tenacity to her hind flanks and giving up not an inch of ground. A mile is indeed a very short distance when traversed at such a pace. The finishing flag was already but a few hundred feet further on. Riley realized that it was time now to go to the front. He gritted his teeth together and, with determination, and bent his head down even further toward this front wheel. Then his feet began to move so quickly that there was only visible an indistinct blur at the size of his crankshaft. At this very second, with a face marked with rage and hatred, Harry brought his horse suddenly across the road to the part of it which he had been warned to avoid. It's hard to tell what kept Riley from being run into and trampled underfoot. An attempt at backpedaling, a sudden twist of the handlebar, a lurch to one side that almost threw him from his seat. Then, in the fraction of a second, he was over on the other side of the road, pushing ahead of the mare almost as though she were standing still. The outburst of alarm from the throats of the soldiers changed when they saw that Riley had not been injured. First into a shout of indignation at the dastardly attempt which had been made to run him down, and then into a roar of delight when the bicyclist breasted the flag a winner of the race by 20 feet. As he crossed the line, Riley caught a glimpse of Washington. He stood close to the flag and was waving his hat in the air with the enthusiasm of a schoolboy. Riley went on down the road, slackening his speed as effectively as he could. But before it was possible to entirely stop, his wheels' momentum, the noisy acclamations in his rear ceased with startling suddenness. He turned in his saddle and looked back. As sure as St. Peter, he had the road entirely to himself. There wasn't a soldier or a ghost of a soldier in sight. As soon as he could, he turned his bicycle about and rode slowly back along the highway, now so singularly deserted, looking hither and thither in vain for some trace of the vanished army. Even the flag, which had been stuck in the ground at the end of the 1-mile race course, was gone. The breeze had died out again, and the air was tranquil and warm. And in the branches of a nearby tree, 2 sparrows chirped and twittered peacefully. Riley went back to the place where the camp had been. He found there only open fields on one side of the road and a clump of woodland on the other. He continued on down the little hill up which Harry and his companions had brought him a few hours previously, and followed the road on further, coming finally to the fork in it near which was located the old farmhouse, where Moran had been taken captive. The house was, as it had been when he had previously entered it, falling apart from age of neglect. When he went inside, he found lying on the brick hearth in front of the fireplace a number of pieces of broken glass. The end. Okay. And I think that just completed the book, too, so we'll start with the new book next week. Let me take a quick look here. Yeah. There's just an ending for... We can do the ending next week because there's an afterword in here, but that's it. And so completes this book. So we'll be starting a new book next week. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. Let me get straight up here. Even I was starting to relax a little too much. Thank you all for joining me tonight, and for those of you that will be reading this soon from the RSS feed, or maybe over on YouTube or whatever, I want to thank you all. I really appreciate you coming and listening and sharing your Sunday evening with me. Tomorrow I'll be back at 6:30 p.m. Pacific in Studio A in the big studio, and we're going to be taking a look at that Easter gingerbread house that I've finished, and we're also going to be building at Lego Yoda tomorrow. And then I'm going to be doing some TikTok work in there during the week, so once Yoda is done to a certain extent, I'm going to put him away until the next time we meet, and work on some TikToks over there. So it's going to be busy this week, and we have a lot of good guests. So I want to thank you guys, and this is what I like to say. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here at California House Radio. We're just trying to get the word out. Also, you see that ticker at the bottom? That's to help keep us on the air. You know, we got to pay bills like everybody else. So we survive. The radio station survives off donations. So if you could help me out a little bit, you're not required. That would be great. There's a Venmo address down there, and there's also a PayPal address down there. Anyway, thank you guys. I'll see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Have a great rest of your evening.